He is a sexy man, and
You guys see me?
for the podcast. No,
Wait, hold on.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, there's my bitch.
Okay. Hey, don't talk to my wife like that.
Hey, oh my God, Kayla, you look so good.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, Cody, you do too, but you know. What are you guys doing? I just spent the last 40 minutes sitting in my backyard. It's like 75 degrees here.
It's just beautiful.
Nice.
Oh, it's so nice.
Yeah, we're getting our garden ready.
Are you?
Yeah. Yep.
I was just out there hoeing the ground.
Hoeing. She's being a real hoe.
Were you out there hoeing?
Yeah.
That's good. That's you know, I mean, there's one in every family.
Right. Hey. Oh, well.
Yeah. Okay, this is fun. Tell me how you want to do this.
Well, it's already begun. That's how we roll. We roll in hot. We just jump in. All the silliness happens. So, B.Bloomed podcast. This is, I'm not sure what episode number this is going to end up being, but today we have a special, handsome, glorious guest.
I like that last part.
Kyle Gambrel. He's like, go on.
Go on. Don't stop.
And this episode is special because Kyle's a good friend of ours. When we were really mixing it up, we all lived in Boise together, right? Kyle moved down to Las Vegas. He's a physician's assistant, amongst other things. Kyle, why don't you tell them a little bit about what you do?
Oh, yeah. So when I moved to Las Vegas, I went to PA school, and then I got a job in critical care. So I'm an intensivist PA. I've been with my group for 3 years practicing now. It's called Western Critical Care Associates. We're a group of 18 ICU providers, and that's what we're doing amongst this COVID pandemic right now. So, yeah, that's what I do.
And didn't you say you also had like a couple side hustles? You're doing some cosmetic stuff out of your house, and you're also
some Botox, some fillers, some stuff just to kind of keep me. I only work a week on and a week off at the hospital, and so I supplement my time income on my play money. My wife says that I spend too much, so I need to make more. And so yeah, exactly. So and then I also work for a company called Face to Face Medical. We do concierge medicine, home visits, telemedicine right now, just because of the recommendations from state and local governments to not go to people's house, you know, limit the spread of the virus and that. So that's what I've been up to.
Okay, so the reason for this whole podcast is Kyle and I were just kind of chatting over Facebook, and I just kind of casually asked him, you know, because I knew he was in the medical field, and I was like, what does this look like on your end, somebody who's in the medical field? And he said a few things that pinged me in terms of what we're going to talk about today, which is the Wim Hof Method. Kyle talked about things like high altitude sickness symptoms. He mentioned things like critical hypoxia. He started saying these words, and it started pinging me for things that I had read in some of the scientific literature that's been done on Wim Hof and the people he trains, in terms of how the Wim Hof Method, it can reduce and or reverse the symptoms of high altitude sickness. So let me real quick, let's just talk about the Wim Hof Method really fast. Kayla and I both practice it regularly. We just did a pretty intense round yesterday. It's breathing, it's cold showers, it's mindset. But essentially, you have this mindset about the cold. Kyle and I had a pretty long conversation about this, and I think he took a cold shower. We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But you develop this mindset about the cold in terms of you're going into the cold to basically work with the fight or flight response to elicit a whole different physiological response than what happens when you go into it with a mindset of fear, right? And then you have the breathing. The breathing exercise is basically hyperventilation breathing. It's a specific method of hyperventilation breathing. Kayla, do you want to talk about your experience in the Wim Hof Method before me and Kyle go crazy on all the technical and other
the
parts of it.
breathing and the
Yeah.
cold exposure.
Yeah, because Kayla, we talked about Ayurveda. Kayla's her dosha is Kapha on Levanta. Kyle hasn't taken his dosha quiz yet, but Kaphas are really cold. They get really cold. They don't like the cold necessarily. I mean, nobody really likes the cold, but tell them about your experience with the cold, being somebody who can't stand it.
I mean, it's always hard. There's that fear when you're standing there with the cold shower running, and you're like, okay, I have to get into this cold water for 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes, however long you're gonna go. But once you get in and you embrace the cold, then there's something so refreshing and kind of revitalizing after you're done. When you come out, I feel rejuvenated and I have more energy. It's kind of like an awakening in some sorts.
Right. We were both kind of dragging ass yesterday, and we dropped down. We did 4 rounds of the breathing, got right in our cold showers, and literally it was like a night or day difference between our mental and physical state before and after. And if I remember the literature correctly, when you're going into the cold with this more of a positive mindset about this embracing of the cold and getting in the cold and relaxing instead of staying tense and exacerbating the fight or flight response, you kind of calm down and you kind of intervene in the fight or flight response, and it releases a whole new set of neurochemicals and whatnot. So Kyle, tell them, because you and I we discussed the breathing, exactly how the breathing, how the method is done, and I'll just give a quick tutorial, and I'll have you talk to them about what's happening in terms of the CO2 and the O2, right?
Yeah,
so
sure. Yeah.
Basically, you lay down on the ground or sit. I prefer to lay down, and you do 30 breaths, like kind of like so. What's happening there is I'm fully inhaling, but I'm only partially exhaling. I'm just letting the weight of the chest fall. I'm not actually forcing the lungs empty. So there's still some CO2 left over with every breath. So you're doing this breath 30 times. At the end of the 30th breath, you leave the lungs completely empty, and then you fight that for as long as you possibly can, and then you gasp in air. You hold that for another 20 to 30 seconds, and as you're doing this, you're kind of putting pressure and almost kind of trying to force the blood up into the brain at this point in time, and then you go back to normal breathing, and then you start the round over again. I think we did 5 rounds. We did. So that's kind of how the breathing goes. Kyle, do you want to tell them what's going on there in terms of CO2 and O2?
Yeah, so I kind of thought this was interesting. You know, I'd never heard of the Wim Hof breathing method or anything. And so when you were like, hey, you should look at this, I think this is kind of cool. I looked at it and I was like, oh, this totally kind of makes sense. So the idea of the science behind Wim Hof's breathing technique is to trick the brain into widening the parameters in which that it will tell your lungs to take a breath, that neural response, because your brain measures carbon dioxide, and then you have these carotid bodies and this group of nerves in your aorta that measure oxygen levels. So by hyperventilating, like you were doing 30 breaths, you're going to blow off carbon dioxide. You're actually going to make your blood's pH for that period of time a little bit alkalotic. Because carbon dioxide is a weak acid. So what you're doing is you're blowing all that CO2 off, and you're creating this alkalotic state, and then you're taking this big deep breath in of oxygen. So what you've done is you've told your brain, like, don't worry, it's okay, the oxygen's coming, and you're creating this training mechanism to where your brain is not as sensitive to low oxygen or low levels of carbon dioxide because you've blown it all off, and you're hyperventilating your lungs, so you have extra oxygen around, but your brain doesn't care about oxygen, right? It only cares about CO2, and you've blown all this CO2 off, and then you take this big deep breath in, and you trick your brain into knowing, like, trusting you, it's okay, you're going to get oxygen. And so by doing this, amongst a whole bunch of other things, what we're doing
Sure.
is creating this euphoric state, this realization that you can stimulate your sympathetic nervous system. You can increase your adrenaline levels without increasing cortisol levels or stressing out. Like Kayla was saying, when I get in the water, that fear is what releases cortisol in your adrenal cortex. And cortisol is a bad hormone. It's a stress hormone. And what the research by studying Wim has shown is that he has these high levels of adrenaline and this sympathetic response without increased levels of cortisol. And it's really amazing, to tell you the truth. I thought it was really neat.
Yeah, it's really cool. What do you think, you and I talked about this in terms of the studies they've done, because not just studies on Wim, they've also done studies on people that he's trained just to make sure that it's not just like he's not some kind of a genetic freak, right? So
well,
people have
this guy is like a super athlete. It's amazing. Like yes.
He's crazy, but people still get a lot of the positive benefits of the method. I mean, they may not be Wim Hof, they may not have 26 world records under their belt, but they can still tap into their parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system if they have the right mindset about doing this stuff, right? But when it comes to COVID, you and I talked about a lot of the symptoms they're showing in terms of high altitude sickness. And you mentioned something about critical hypoxia and like something about the porphyrin ring around the iron molecule, how something about how it is preventing the red blood cells from getting oxygen to the organs. And I looked at some of the Wim Hof studies, and they talked a lot about the high altitude training where they studied people, and they were able to withstand high altitude sickness. I can't remember what they used to measure it. There's like there's a scale they used to measure how bad the high altitude the high altitude sickness symptoms were. But by using the Wim Hof method, by training, I think it was like 6 to 9 weeks, wasn't it? You read the paper, right?
Yeah.
It was 6 to 9 weeks or 6 to 9 months. I can't remember, but they had to train previously, right? They didn't just like walk up the mountain that day without ever training.
Right.
They had to train their lungs. But the point is, they're showing that the Wim Hof method can literally reverse and or reduce the effects of high altitude sickness. Now, how does high altitude sickness tie into what you and other doctors are seeing in these COVID patients?
Well, so I think the better question is, what is COVID doing to our lungs that are creating this super critical? So you can remember, 80% of people who come down with the virus are going to be asymptomatic, subclinical. They're not going to be critical patients, right? Only roughly around 8 to 10% are critical patients in the ICU on a ventilator. And COVID-19 is really interesting because it acts a lot like malaria, whereas it's breaking down hemoglobin molecules. So your oxygen carrying capacity in the red blood cell is quite a bit lower than it is at baseline. And how it does that is the hemoglobin molecule is built on one iron particle, and that iron particle is radical. It's a radical ion. And so we can't just let those floating around the body because they do a lot of oxidative damage in the tissue.
Right.
You guys have heard of radical ions and things like that, right?
Yep.
Antioxidants is why we take antioxidants.
Well, antioxidants are so good because they help get rid of or mitigate free radicals in the body, correct?
Exactly.
Something like that, right?
So what's happening is this COVID-19 virus is breaking up the cage around a free radical. And so the free radical gets out, it causes damage to the lung tissue, increases an inflammatory response, and then it renders the hemoglobin inside the red blood cells inadequate. They're not able to carry oxygen anymore. So I kept on telling my colleagues, I said, this looks like high altitude sickness. I said, this does not look like pneumonia. We're treating it like a pneumonia, but it's not a viral pneumonia. It's actually like somebody took our patients and dropped them off at the base camp at Mount Everest and without any training. And so what's happening is they're just unable to carry oxygen. And so the body's natural response to low oxygen levels is to increase ventilation, so breathe faster, right? To increase perfusion to the lungs, so increase blood flow to the lungs. Okay. And then what I thought was interesting is that it also, in a roundabout way, tells our kidneys to make more red blood cells or to tell our bones to make more red blood cells. And it also increases capillary growth in the tissue, in the, like, you know, your organs, that kind of thing. And so we can increase blood delivery. And that's your body's mechanisms for low oxygen levels. And so Cody and I were talking about how if you had been practicing the Wim Hof breathing technique, that you would have already stimulated your body to respond like you had low oxygen levels. If you were practicing this breathing technique, like, you would have already increased your brain thinking, I need to take a breath, or your tissue levels, you would have already begun increased perfusion and increased blood flow to your organs. You would have already begun to basically expand the window in which your blood levels will accept and exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. So Cody asked me, so let's say somebody had been practicing this, would they, like, how could they fight COVID? And I like did my due diligence and did some research about, you know, the Wim Hof method of breathing and all the scientific stuff, you know, all the journal articles and all the stuff that nobody likes to read. And so basically, I mean, what I came to the conclusion of is, if you had been practicing this and you got COVID, I mean, I can, with relatively, you know, confidence, I can say that you would have a better chance of fighting the virus and what it does to your body. You would probably not get as sick. You probably would prevent ever going on a ventilator. Now, I say that with the caveat that people who do practice this are relatively active, you know, such as yourselves. You guys are practicing yoga and you're meditating and you're doing all aspects of the Wim method. And the patients that we're seeing in the ICU are overweight. They have hypertension, you know, they have other comorbidities, they have previous lung disease, that kind of thing. And those are the ones that are really super critical. And they're not the ones practicing, you know, the Wim method. But if you were the average Joe and you wanted to assure yourself a way of preventing getting really sick from COVID-19, you could practice breathing techniques like this and start training your body to fight such an infection, just because of the mechanisms that it uses to create the hypoxia.
So you got me thinking, when you were talking about, you know, what you guys are seeing in your patients, you're like, this stood out to me. You know, it's not really a pneumonia. It's not really looking like pneumonia. It's looking like you took somebody and just dropped them at the Everest base camp without any training. Well, it sounds to me like doing things like the Wim Hof method is a way of training,
right,
for being dropped off at the base
right,
camp.
just like
in this
the Wim Hof
situation,
method
contracting COVID.
Training to fight this kind of infection.
And why I think that's so powerful is this is mutually exclusive. Your experience with seeing these symptoms and the results of the Wim Hof method on these people doing high altitude training, mutually exclusive. You had no idea about it, but you had seen these symptoms in your patients. But by putting those two things together, it kind of goes together too well to ignore, in terms of, yeah, we're not saying it's a cure-all, it's a silver bullet, but we're saying between things like doing bare minimal maintenance of your health in terms of getting, I mean, okay, I get it. There's some people out there who are severely deconditioned. Go for a walk. Go for a half-hour walk 4 times a week. You know, if you just show up and do that, and then start maybe trying the breathing method, try the cold showers. Yeah, it sucks, but if you would do it from a mentality of, but it's completely free. Like,
right
here, you know, medical, you know, pharmaceutical companies don't want you to say this because they make money off of selling medicine, but it doesn't mean that modern medicine isn't helpful. It means that I think between something like this, that's kind of, I don't want to say holistic, but it's not pharmaceutical, right? You're just using your body. You're using the capabilities of your body, and you combine that with modern medicine. It could be a pretty powerful marriage of two worlds in terms of fighting this thing.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought was really interesting as far as the research goes is that they took the placebo effect into consideration, because there is a certain portion of any medicine, any training method, any anything really, any technique to push the body to extremes. Like there is a mind over matter portion of anything that's researched in all medical avenues. And so I thought that that was pretty interesting. They kind of embraced the placebo effect. Like, yeah, we get it. There's a placebo effect, but we're saying that you can use that to your advantage. You can use the placebo effect, use the power of your mind through meditation. And like you said, Code, the cold shower sucks. I'm not going to lie. I actually didn't take a shower, but my pool was about 63 degrees. And so what
come on.
Is
get your ass in the shower.
Well, hold on, because I was like, I'm going to do this. I got up and I went out to the pool and I just jumped in, and it was awful. It was awful. And then I set a timer and was like, I'm going to stay in here because Cody told me to for 2 minutes. And it was miserable, absolutely miserable. But I think that like roughly 45 seconds to a minute into it, I was like, you know what? If I stop focusing on how miserable this is and just like kind of just relax a little bit, then it's probably going to be over with soon and I can get out. And it really wasn't all that bad, but you have to cognitively think about relaxing. Otherwise, you do exactly what you're supposed to in a cold environment. You breathe faster. You don't take deep breaths. You're freezing. You're thinking about it. You're dreaming about Maui. I mean, things are bad. And so, but I really liked it. It was kind of cool. And I did that. And then I did the breathing technique when I got out, and I felt really good. I felt almost kind of sharp a little bit, like for the day, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And that's cool. I'm so glad you tried it, because like we said on the phone, it's one thing to talk about it intellectually, it's another to experience it. Right.
Yeah.
And you just said something that really pinged me. What is it about the breath that's so cool, Kayla? We talk about in our yoga classes of breathing. What's so interesting about the breath?
Well, it's something that you can control and that controls itself.
Right. So the breath is done automatically by the autonomic nervous system, but you can also tap into it consciously and grab control of it. What Kyle just said about the cold, what did he say? He said that
you breathe faster.
Well, actually, he was talking about the body wants to be tense and be afraid. Like, it just naturally it automatically responds that way. But with the Wim Hof mindset about the cold, just like with the breathing, you can get in there and control it, and you can intervene and say, no, we're not going to tense up, we're going to relax. Yeah. So you can actually intervene with your autonomic nervous system with this method, with the breathing and the cold.
If I'm wrong, like when he's without a shirt, basically just in his underwear on the side of a mountain at 40,000 feet, he uses deep breathing and stimulates his diaphragm and his intercostals to generate heat, and that's how he's able to keep his body temperature pretty much where he wants it. Correct?
Yeah, it's a form of it's a yogic meditation. I believe it's called Tumo meditation. That's where he got it from, I think. But he took that and he applied it to the cold. It's pretty astounding. I mean, that somebody's able to do that. But that's extreme. But even what you did in your pool the other day, even that moment of saying, no, you know what? I'm going to settle into this. I'm going to let go. My buddy Boston Nelson, who got me into this, he says you have to just kind of let go of the fear and the want. It's called fight or flight for a reason. You have to let go of the want to fly out of the water, right? So you just let go and you just kind of accept the fact that you're going to be in the cold, and you slow your breathing down, and it just sends different signals to the brain, and then the body responds completely differently as opposed to sitting in there just going, you're actually tapping in, and just like with the breathing, you're taking something that's done automatically normally, and you are intervening with it and saying, no, we're not going to do that right now. We're gonna just be here in the cold. And that the brain scans, they've shown that flushes out a whole new set of neurochemicals as opposed to being in a fear state.
Yeah.
And also that has a lot to do with the anti-inflammatory. I think it not only does it up your body's anti-inflammatory response, but it decreases its inflammation response too.
Yeah, so it had to do with your cytokines, your inflammatory response, your interleukins, that kind of thing. It's basically how your body signals an inflammatory response using chemicals, or how it tells your body, this is no big deal, don't worry about this. It can turn on and off the immune system response. And the research that they did is he took, I think, 12 or 15 people, and they taught them the Wim Hof breathing method. And then they induced them with an endotoxin that comes from E. coli bacteria that gives like flu-like symptoms. And it was relatively safe because they had removed the bacteria from it and they just gave the toxin. But then they studied how well people symptomatically, how well they did. And again, this was all subjective information, so you don't really know because it wasn't a blind study or anything, but they were able to calculate that the people who had been practicing and had been trained in the Wim Hof method, they had less of a inflammatory response, less of a reaction, less symptoms, which was pretty interesting to me because on his website, he does claim that you can tailor your immune system response by using his method, which, that's in medicine, that's like, well, that's a pretty big claim, right? And so, but I mean, and it's only one study of 12 or 15 people or something like that. But the data shows that they did have less of a response, which that's pretty incredible. So
the whole thing's damn incredible. And I was so excited to share it with somebody who has a background in medicine. And like, I don't want to say, we want to avoid things like confirmation bias. We don't want to overstep our bounds and say, things that are found in some kind of science. But I think what we've discovered in our conversation is that this is something that it's not difficult to do, and it can be highly preventative in terms of keeping you resilient. It's not gonna coronavirus proof you, but it's gonna keep your body resilient if you contracted it. But not just the Wim Hof method, but we have to take care of ourselves physically. We know that if you're exercising, you're eating well, we know that's going to help the body be resilient, but also the mental, physical reciprocity, right? So if your mental state is stress all the time, your body's going to be affected as well. So things like meditation, managing stress. So it's kind of what we teach with B.Bloomed is a comprehensive kind of a holistic fitness, right? It's not just about going to the gym is one thing, but going to the gym and meditating is a whole other thing.
Right.
It kind of really, we call it the mind-body complex, right? Because science heavily recognizes the mind-body connection. Do we fully understand it yet? No, we call it the placebo effect. Yeah. But we know it's powerful as hell. And so here we have meditation, we have yoga, we have the Wim Hof method, exercise, diet, all these things wrapped together. I'm just kind of being brash here when I say it, but it makes you superhuman compared statistically to other people.
Yeah, well, I guess I would probably say that not just COVID, right now we're talking about COVID because it's really interesting the way that it works, and then we can relate it to how Wim Hof has trained people to climb, Mount Kilimanjaro. But I think that by practicing things like this, the mind, the body, the relationship between the two, having a healthy diet, exercising a little bit, working on making your body less sensitive to change, and making it more adaptable, I guess, to climate, to environment, things like that. You're just protecting yourself in general. You're protecting yourself from all disease process. You're protecting yourself from all infectious process.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where your and I's conversation came to the conclusion, was that not only is this great, specifically to train yourself if you did get the coronavirus, that you would be more apt to and put up a better fight against it, but also, just health in general. You're just a lot healthier person by practicing things like this.
Well, what you said is, and the people you're seeing, the ones who are critical, are the ones who aren't taking care of themselves.
Correct.
Right. So, this whole thing's a big wake up call to everybody. There's always this big joke around the world about, Americans being obese, right? Well, that's statistically not a joke. It's a fact, right? So, and I know it's difficult. There's a whole mental thing associated with weight, but it's free. The only thing that costs you is your time to start taking care of yourself, right? Instead of laying back and saying, "Pump me full of chemicals, doc," that that doesn't work as well as taking care of yourself.
Correct. Yeah. I don't see healthy people in the ICU. Not really. I mean, this COVID thing has been kind of different because there are some people that have been on a ventilator that I thought were relatively healthy individuals. They weren't, you know, the typical old comorbid people, which that kind of took me by surprise. But I think that it took everybody in the medical community by surprise. The way it acts, the way it's treated, you know, just the pharmacology of the virus itself, the way it was spread. And I just, you know, I will mention something as a disclaimer. You know, we appreciate everybody who is in healthcare. I think I could speak for by saying that we appreciate people staying home. I think that we have flattened the curve. I think that we have, you know, limited the spread of the virus and the contagion, and y'all have made our lives a lot easier. I wouldn't say that our hospital's busy. I would say that I've been underwhelmed by the volume of patients in the intensive care unit, but I'm also contributing that a lot to people self-isolating, which is awesome. You know, I think that as a country as a whole, we've done a really good job to stop a pandemic from getting too far out of hand.
Well, and we want to thank you too for being on the front lines as well. I mean, because it's crazy. I can't imagine what that's like to be there right in front of it all the time. But I'm sure you guys are taking all your preventative measures, your PPE and everything. But before we wrap, do you have anything? We talked a little bit about people who should or shouldn't do things like the Wim Hof Method, and basically the conclusion we came to was you have to be pretty much a statistical outlier to not be able to do this method, right? Explain what would be a disclaimer for people who are considering practicing this.
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't get too far into some of the strenuous breathing techniques if I was pregnant, but I'm not going to ever be pregnant. So all you pregnant women out there,
you would make a beautiful baby.
Maybe, I don't know. It would have a great goatee. So I think that probably, you know, leave this for when you're after, you know, postpartum, that kind of thing, when you're back into the gym or back into eating healthy. And, you know, I probably wouldn't suggest the pregnant women do this. I also would caution people with severe lung disease, people who have restrictive and obstructive lung disease, because the breathing techniques themselves would be better for somebody with COPD or asthma, obstructive lung disease. That actually, this breathing technique would probably help them, tell you the truth. But people who have, you know, lung scarring, lung cancer, restrictive lung diseases, interstitial lung diseases, you're going to have a really hard time performing breathing exercises like this. And you actually might create some kind of response from the body where you can't overcome a fight or flight response, and you might end up in the hospital. And I just think that I would probably caution people, know your limits, you know, especially when it comes to a disease process, that kind of thing.
What about like the cold? Like people, can you think of anything? Can you think of any population who would need to be cautious about getting into the cold, like we're talking about?
Yeah, so probably people with like sickle cell anemia. I probably would recommend that they don't just jump in to a 60-degree pool, just because the complications of sickle cell, and that's a whole nother thing, but the complications of sickle cell, you are restricting capillaries, and you could induce sickle cell crisis if in fact you started doing something like this without, you know, gradually working up to anything. That would probably be the one offhand that I would recommend against.
What about like heart conditions? Like because this could cause anxiety, right? Getting the cold.
Yeah, it could. Your heart's pretty resilient though. I think so. I mean, so what we were talking about earlier is being able to control the parasympathetic nervous system, right? That's our breathing and our heart rate. Now, I can slow my heart rate down by relaxing. I can increase my heart rate by, you know, like getting anxious about something. And so being able to practice that kind of control, you know, in a congruence with the sympathetic response or your adrenaline response, or we have all this adrenaline that's being released from our, you know, adrenal cortex, but we're able to relax and we're able to slow our heart rate and our breathing down. I think that would be beneficial to people with heart disease or lung disease. Tell you the truth, it's just if you ever ask an asthmatic what happens when they have an asthma exacerbation and they have to go to the hospital or something, is they say, I'm so panicked about breathing, right? But if they're able to relax or have some control, practicing breathing techniques like this, then, I mean, I would venture to say that they would probably be able to maybe mitigate some of the symptoms seen with asthma exacerbations.
So that's a really good point. And they got me thinking now. I was listening to, I think it's Impact Theory. You see Impact Theory at all on YouTube? You seen it? Well, he had a guest on who's some kind of psychologist, and they couldn't think of a high anxiety situation with low consequences. After your jump into the pool, can you think of a high anxiety situation with low consequences?
I don't know.
Cold water. The cold water is
the cold water.
That's what I mean. Like, so what you're describing this patient who having kind of anxiety associated with the breathing, and the cold water can be a great place to train for that event in terms of how to tap into the parasympathetic nervous system and calm themselves down.
Yes. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
So it's a great place to end, Kyle. I can't thank you enough for coming on. This is our very first Zoom episode. So thanks for being on.
I'll let you know when it airs, and I'll check it out. I'll share it with everybody. It was so good to see you guys. Kayla, beautiful as ever. Cody, you handsome stepman. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Kyle. Take care, man.
You guys take care of yourselves. We'll talk soon, okay?
See you, brother.
Bye, Kyle.
Bye.